I am Danielle Wood, and I work for CivicMic. I'm a director here with the company, and the city has hired us to help your community to work collectively with them to shape your community's future. So the City of Vista is going above and beyond to educate all of you in the community with the options that are available for you to continue with your landscape and lighting services within the city. So there are a few ground rules for this meeting. We will try to respect everyone's time and keep the meeting to about an hour. After an hour, we typically see people start logging off. So we want to make sure that everyone hears the entire presentation and any questions that are being asked. The meeting will be recorded and posted to civicmic.com/Vista. So you can find that there within the next 48 hours after tonight's meeting. All questions will be held until the end of the meeting so we can get through the presentation. So you will be on mute. And if you remove yourself from mute, you'll notice that our facilitator will place you back on mute until the end of the meeting. So just hold all questions till the end. If you have a question that comes up, write it down so you don't forget it. And we will make sure that we have plenty of time to get to questions, because that is one of the most important pieces of this meeting, is that we hear from all of you. We would like to encourage participation from everyone, so we will shield you from any foul language or personal attacks. We do not expect that to happen, but if that does happen, the individual that is creating that behavior will be removed and placed into a breakout room for time to cool down, and possibly removed from the meeting if that continues. Like I said, we don't expect that to happen, but we just like to let you know the ground rules from the very beginning. When we get to questions, I will discuss how we will take those questions, and I'll go over how you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, stuff like that. So don't worry about that at this time. To start off the meeting, we have Mike Sylvia here with the city, and he will go over the history of the districts. Mike?
Thank you, Danielle. Good evening, everyone. So let's see, we move our slide deck forward one here.
Sorry about that. Let me pull it up real quick.
Thanks, John.
We're trying to move some individuals to the Spanish-speaking waiting room.
We can wait a couple minutes, no problem. All right. We good to go?
Sure. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, again, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Sylvia, as Danielle said. I'm the city's finance director and treasurer. Also with us on this call is Chris Arce, our public works director. He's going to help out with our Q&A section at the end, especially with some of the field work elements, that any questions that everyone might have. We can go to our next slide. So yeah, we have two citywide assessment districts here in the city of Vista. They were both formed in the early 1990s, and their boundaries do match the city's incorporated area. You might ask why we have two of them, since they're both maintenance districts, and that is because of legal limitations with which the types of services that can be provided in each one. And we've got Sarah Maris, who's going to cover some of those details and limitations of each in her presentation shortly. The amounts assessed per parcel have remained the same since the 90s because they lack an annual assessment escalation factor, meaning the revenues have been static for nearly 30 years. And due to major increases in costs over that same period, in order to provide a consistent level of services, the district's ability to fund those services now is in jeopardy because of the strain of inflation, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And so when staff identified a couple of years ago that this funding shortfall, if you will, We went to city council, determined the limitations of the funding, and let council know that it would be insufficient for ongoing levels of service. Council did provide direction to seek an assessment engineering consultant to assist staff in the re-engineering effort of the two districts. NBS was hired in the fall of 2023, and the process began a comprehensive data collection, including a deep dive into the city's GIS files to ensure the correct improvements were included in the districts in the reassessment calculations, and more importantly, that all the properties were being assessed accurately. This effort required 2 annual phases, and tonight we'll be discussing phase 2 of the project. Specifically, the city's two citywide assessment districts are the Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District and the Streets Maintenance District. So purpose and use of funds within the Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District provides for street tree, street side, and median landscape maintenance services throughout the city. In addition, the city's maintenance costs for the network of nearly 4,600 streetlights and more than 100 traffic signals are provided by the LLMD assessment levy. Over the years, staff has worked to stretch the available assessment funding, with a prime example of that being replacing incandescent light bulbs in the streetlights with LED bulbs, which has saved the property owners significantly on utility costs in the ensuing years. Within the street maintenance district, that funding that is provided by the property owners provides for streets and roadways, street sweeping services, as well as a small portion of the city's efforts to maintain more than 400 lane miles of streets throughout the city, specifically crack sealing, pavement repair, and some restriping. Go to the next slide, please. The district's services have evolved over time, both in terms of the quantity of the improvements that are being maintained and how and what types of improvements exist today versus past years. An example of this in the Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District is a shift to the Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, model of pest management a couple of years ago. The IPM provides a less toxic way to deal with the pests. However, it is significantly more expensive and labor intensive than prior methods. Similarly, in the Streets Maintenance District, improved green bike lane painting as well as the protected bike lanes do help protect cyclists, but of course, maintaining these new elements is more costly. Let me go to the next slide, please. This next table, this really illustrates how the cost of things have changed over time, and it goes without saying everyone has lived through a period of elevated inflation over the last few years. But this specifically is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows their CPI inflation calculator comparing when Proposition 218 went into effect in 1997 to the end of 2024. We can see that prices have nearly doubled. It's a 89.37% loss in purchasing power over this period. And it's worth noting during the same period, California minimum wages have increased from $5 to $16.50, which is a 230% increase. When the districts were formed, minimum wage was actually $3.85. So again, revenues have been static for 25 years. Costs have significantly increased, and other input costs such as water and electricity have increased in a major way due to droughts and wildfire mitigation costs, respectively. So in terms of re-engineering highlights, I don't want to steal too much of Sarah's thunder, but there is a shift in assessment allocation, and this is an important element and really represents how the city is making a commitment to its property owners to share in this re-engineering. Currently, City Council does provide a subsidy for one of the two districts, the Landscape and Lighting District, and that is, while it's existed for a number of years, that is a discretionary policy decision, and it could be pulled back per City Council direction really at any time. These new districts would require the city to have an annual contribution. And again, Sarah will get into those details. It's part of the new assessment engineering formula, and it would be included in every year's annual assessment levy in both new districts. The street maintenance district does not currently have a contribution from the general fund. So one might ask, well, gosh, Mike, what's going to happen if we don't make a change here? The short answer is, with all likelihood, because of the limitations of funding, a reduced level of service. And again, that assumes the external funding source subsidy, which is the general fund. If it were to stay the same or if it were to decline, it would increase the reduced rate of service. An example of that might be turning off every other street light. I believe I was told before I was on staff here, that was done at one point around the Great Recession, before the incandescent light bulbs were replaced with the LEDs to save on utility costs. In the street maintenance district, there's already been a reduction in level of services, specifically the frequency with which street sweeping is done. Other impacts could be slower roadway repairs. So, there are potentially real impacts to not getting these new assessment districts approved. And we just want to make sure all of the affected property owners are aware of what could happen. Turning to the annual levy impacts, we can go to the next slide. There we go. At the end of the day, I'm assuming most everyone here is wondering, okay, how is this going to impact me financially? And within the landscape and lighting maintenance district, the vast majority of property owners would pay less than $120 a year, or about $10 a month. More than 4 out of 5, or 80% of the property owners, will pay less than $36 more per year than they currently do, which breaks down to about a cup of coffee per month. Turning to the street maintenance district, nearly all the property owners will pay less than $120 annually, or $10 a month. And in addition, over half of the property owners would actually pay less in the first year versus the current assessment district levels. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to walk us through the specifics of the new assessment districts.
Thank you so much, Mike. While we get the next slide presentation up, we'll just thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your evening to hear about these important issues for your community. Let's go to the first slide, please, John. Quick agenda of the topics that I will cover this evening includes some legislative context, just so you do have some understanding of how these districts work. We will have the formation process for assessment districts. We'll talk about assessment engineering and how that has worked, the proposed district boundary and the improvements to be funded, along with the formation schedule, and not to spoil the result here, but we will be sharing some of the assessment rates with you as well, which we know is what folks are here for. So in terms of the legislative context, we do want to just talk about Proposition 218, since that was a voter initiative that was approved in 1996, and it is part of California's Constitution. Proposition 218 is the governing body of law that tells us how assessment districts work. It creates strict rules on how benefit assessments are allocated. It specifies that general benefit to the community at large is separated from special benefit to properties being assessed, and then also requires that special benefit is allocated proportionately. That analysis is prepared and certified by a registered professional engineer in the state of California. And I think it's important to mention, Mike talked about that contribution on the city's part for the general benefit. The city is also not exempt from paying the special assessment, nor are other government agencies, if they do benefit from the services. And we'll talk about the approval process, which includes a protest ballot proceeding. Again, that's part of California's Constitution. Next slide. Mike mentioned this as well, but we do have two authorizing acts that we're operating under. So the Landscape and Lighting Act, as you can imagine, is related to funding of maintenance and services of landscape and lighting improvements. Again, we've got a code reference here for you in terms of being able to make reference to that law if that's something you choose to do. And next slide. The Street Maintenance District is under the Benefit Assessment Act of 1982. And again, just because of the way these laws were written, that Landscape and Lighting Act doesn't allow for street maintenance, but the Benefit Assessment Act does. So these districts were formed separately due to the limitations of those two laws. They are both considered assessments, and they're both governed by the rules around assessments in Proposition 218 as well. And the code reference is available there for you as well for that Benefit Assessment Act. Next slide. So in terms of how we approach the assessment district formation, I think walking through a quick overview of the formation process is important. We do gather quite a bit of data, including very parcel specific information. We do the analysis to understand that general benefit as well as that special benefit in the context of Proposition 218. And again, that is analysis that is approved by a registered professional engineer. And then that is provided in what's called the engineer's report. And so that is the technical document that provides all of the information about the benefits, the boundary, how the assessment is calculated, how it's allocated to each type of property, etc. And that document will be made available. Then in terms of approval, we do need to ask for approval from property owners. This is not a charge that the city can impose without approval from property owners. So there's a first council meeting where a resolution of intention is approved by the council. And after that, ballots are mailed to property owners where they have an opportunity to cast their ballot in favor or in opposition. Following the casting of those ballots, there is a public hearing where folks can also come to the council and hear testimony and then be heard in terms of their opinion, and also make sure that their ballots are turned in. If that process is successful and the assessment is approved, then council would adopt another resolution that would form the district. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail a little later in the presentation. Next slide. The methodology of how we come up with the assessment amounts is to identify the specific improvements to be maintained. In this case, we're looking at what are the very specific streets that are being maintained, as well as where is the location of the landscaping and lighting improvements that are being maintained. We're determining a maintenance cost estimate, identifying the parcels that benefit from the maintenance of the improvements, separating that general and special benefit, allocating proportional special benefit to the parcels, and then calculating the assessments to be levied based on that analysis. Next slide. We'll start by going through the landscape and lighting maintenance assessment district first. This is a map of the City of Vista, and all of those little yellow dots are where we have street lights located. And it's a little hard to see because we're zoomed out on this map, but along a lot of those roadways is also where the landscaping is being maintained, including medians. This district will fund the maintenance, operation, and servicing of street trees and other landscaping, street lighting, and traffic signals throughout the city. Next slide. Our first step, now that we know where those improvements are located and we've identified the properties that benefit, is to separate out the general benefit. And what we've done to go through that analysis is look at who is driving on the roadways where there are traffic signals, streetlights, and landscaping, and how many of those trips through the district are from properties that are being assessed. When we look at all of those trips and all of those properties, we understand that the total amount of pass-through traffic is about 55%. But that's not the level of general benefit, because those folks who are just passing through the district don't enjoy the same type of benefits that someone who does live or work in the district it would. And it's also not the same because they're not receiving any of the economic benefit of these improvements either. So we've gone through this analysis to understand that the pass-through percentage and therefore the general benefit percentage is 18.19%. And we'll show you what that means to the budget in just a moment. Next slide. So now that we know what our general benefit is, we have to calculate that special benefit. So for each individual parcel in the district, we're looking at how the improvements are benefiting those parcels in terms of safety, accessibility, economic activity, aesthetics, and livability. And we're looking at the individual parcel characteristics, such as land use and lot square footage. And I do want to make a note here for just in case there's anyone on the call or watching later that is in the South Melrose neighborhood. We do recognize that South Melrose has its own district that pays for services within that particular district. And so that is also a factor when we determine what the benefit is in the citywide district. Next slide. This is the budget for services. And a couple of notes here. This is about a 15% increase over the 24-25 budget. And as Mike mentioned, Mike talked quite a bit about inflation and cost increases. The costs have roughly doubled since these districts were formed, and the assessments have doubled, but the total amount of assessments collected has been a result of development within the city. Meaning, as a new apartment complex or subdivision or commercial development comes in, those properties pay more as a result of their development into this district. However, the rates that are paid have remained the same. And so if you have been in the district and you have owned the same property since the early 1990s, the amount you have paid has not increased at all. So total assessments collected, those amounts have increased with the cost on the back of new development throughout the city. And now that the city is close to reaching full build out, we recognize that those assessments will not continue to increase as a result of new development. So costs will, however, continue to increase. And so the reason that we're presenting this to the community is to make sure that on a go-forward basis, the city is able to continue collecting sufficient revenue to keep up with those cost increases in the future that won't come from new development occurring, because there's not much room for additional new development. Next slide. This is where that general benefit contribution comes in. Of that total maintenance cost budget of approximately $1.6 million, The city will be paying $305,125. That is an increase over the current discretionary contribution that is approximately $261,000. So the city is taking a larger share of the cost that is going to be assessed in this district. Next slide. This is some detail about how those assessment rates are calculated. We're using a point system in order to calculate the rates. So based on all of those special benefits that I mentioned, including safety, accessibility, economic activity, aesthetics, and livability, points are assigned to each parcel. And then we calculate, based on those costs, what the maximum rate is per point. And then we're assigning that to each individual parcel. And we'll show you again what that means individually to certain land use classes, and information will be available so you can go look up your specific parcel and find out exactly what you would be paying under this new assessment. Next slide. So drum roll, please. These are the assessment amounts for the landscape maintenance district. Again, these are averages on a per parcel basis. So I do want to contextualize this just a little bit. On average, single family residential will be paying $54. On average, a condominium would pay $22. Commercial and industrial on a per parcel basis average is $286. I mentioned publicly owned parcels. In addition to the dollar amount that will be contributed for general benefit, that $300,000, the city owns parcels that will also total $25,000 of the assessment. And undeveloped on average would be 57, and that is really affected by the size of the parcel. But a couple of notes here before we move on is to, as Mike mentioned, we have 28% roughly of parcels will have an assessment that is less than what they paid in 24-25. About 70% of parcels will increase less than $20 a year over what was paid in 24-25. And a little more than 80% of parcels will increase less than $36 or $3 a month over what they paid in 24-25. So again, very for the majority of the parcels, pretty minimal increases in terms of what they would pay now versus what was paid in 24-25. And so with that, we will move into the street maintenance district. I will move a little more quickly through this since we've just heard a lot of the basic information. The street maintenance district, as you can imagine, pays for maintenance of streets, roads, and pavement areas. Next slide. The methodology to determine the general benefit analysis is the same in the SMD as it was in the landscape district. So we come up with that percentage of 18.19% as our general benefit contribution. Next slide. The benefits for the street maintenance are a little bit different, but we do recognize accessibility, emergency response, and economic activity. And in this case, we're using a little bit different criteria to determine each parcel's proportional special benefit. We're looking at the average daily trip data, which comes from the Institute of Traffic Engineers, as well as land use. Next slide. The budget for the SMD is shown here. Total cost of improvements is about a 47% increase over the current year's budget of $335,000. And we'll take a look again at how that general benefit contribution and other factors then flow into affect the assessment amounts. Next slide. This, we take that total assessment amount and then we are reducing that by the general benefit contribution. So again, where the city is currently contributing no funding to the street maintenance, the general benefit contribution would be $77,129. Next slide. And in the same way that the assessment was allocated to by a benefit point system in the landscape district, we're using a similar methodology here to assign benefit points to the individual parcels to come up with the rate per benefit point. And then that gets applied to each individual parcel. Next slide. And one more drum roll, please. The average amount for the SMD on for single family residential is $8. The average amount for a condominium is $7. On commercial, it is $142 on average. Again, those publicly owned parcels, in addition to that general fund contribution, would pay about $5,000 for city-owned parcels. And again, just to give you the comparison, about 47%, almost half of the parcels in this district will pay less than what they paid in 24-25. And in the 96-97% range, their increase will be less than $3 a month or $36 a year over what was paid in 24-25. So, you know, again, very modest increases considering the level of increase to cost over the time period that these districts have been in place. Next slide. And just in case, so that you can kind of see the total impact of both of these districts together, we wanted to show you both the amounts for the landscaping and the street maintenance so that you could see together that on average, the single family residential would be the $54 plus the $8, you know, so that condo would be $22 plus $7. So again, $29 is about the impact here for most, on average for those condo parcels. And so we'll just let this sit for a moment so folks can kind of absorb the information on the slide. All right, let's go ahead and proceed to the next slide. So I promised we would talk about this formation process so that you are clear on what's to come. In terms of the ballot proceeding, the who is property owners. This is not a proceeding that goes to registered voters. By virtue of Proposition 218, we are required to send ballots to property owners. The ballot that is mailed is weighted by your assessment amount. So if, for example, my assessment is $35, and because I own a single family home, and Mike's assessment is $20 because he owns a condo, my ballot is worth more than his because I would pay more. You can cast your ballot in favor or in opposition. And once all those ballots are tabulated, we are counting up the dollar amount of the ballots returned in favor and comparing that to the dollar amount of the ballots returned in opposition. If a majority of the dollar amount of the ballots returned is in favor, then the district is approved. If, however, the total dollar amount of the ballots returned is greater in opposition, then the existing assessment districts would remain in place. Next slide. In terms of timing, we are scheduled to go to the City Council on March 25th with that first action, which is a resolution initiating proceedings to form the district, and also that resolution of intention. Also in March, ballots would be mailed to property owners, so those assessment ballots would be mailed. The due date for those assessment ballots is May 13th. You can turn in your ballot anytime up until the close of the public hearing that is held on May 13th. Following that public hearing at the council meeting, the ballots will be opened and tabulated. That is all done in public view, should anyone wish to come and watch that process. And at the following council meeting, the resolution would be adopted declaring the results of that ballot tabulation, which I believe is, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, May 27th.
That's correct, Sarah. It'd be the second regular city council meeting in May.
Thank you. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Danielle to see, to moderate questions.
Thank you, Sarah. So for those of you that have not been to the CivicMic website, that's CivicMic.com, civicmic.com/Vista, and we will put that in the chat as well. If you haven't been to the webpage, this webpage was developed solely to educate the community about these districts and this process. So like I said, this meeting will be shared on that page within the next 2 days. You can sign up here to receive updates. We will be sharing information, bite-sized pieces of education about the district and the services over the next month and a half, 2 months, and letting you know once ballots have been mailed, if you didn't receive a ballot, if you need a replacement ballot, and then ultimately the results of the ballot tabulation. But on that page, something that I think all of you would like to see, when you visit the page, you can scroll down and there's an interactive map where you can type in your address, or you can just look because you're familiar with your community, and click on your home, and you can see what you're currently paying for this year, what was on the tax bill for this year for the 2 districts, and what your proposed assessment would be if you approve the district for the new districts that would be in place. So you can see that information specifically for your property. And that information is available now. We will be sending out a content piece if you sign up for updates, explaining exactly how to find that and sharing that information with you so you can send it to your neighbor or someone else in your community to let them know if they weren't here at this meeting how to do that as well. So feel free to reach out to us. civicmic.com/Vista. You can email us. We'll answer questions that we receive. We'll answer them and post them right there on the webpage. Or you can call us directly, 1-800-676-7516. And with that, we will move into questions. So what we would like to do is anyone that most of you are on here and able to just unmute yourself or raise your hand. So we're going to start with individuals that can raise your hand feature. What we ask is that you limit your questions to 1 question. I know a lot of times when you get on this platform, you have 5 or 6, but let's ask 1 and then move to the next individual. If there's no one else in line, then we can come back to you and answer another one. But we want to give everyone an opportunity to ask their questions as well. So also, let's not use this opportunity here to kind of give our opinion, but more to ask questions and get feedback. So if anyone has a question, I see Toby, you took yourself off mute. So if you would like, go ahead and ask your question.
So this is probably not the forum to do it, but if I have a question about getting a street light or repairing sidewalks or dealing with the Buena Vista Creek, I would do that at info@cityofvista.com.
Mike, is that correct? Is that where they should be reaching out to? That's where you can report your landscaping concerns, but is that the best place to reach out for the items that Toby is mentioning?
I think Chris could probably best address that question.
Yeah, excuse me, that's correct. Yeah, you can go on there and then you fill out the form and it'll send it to the direct department that it's going to. If it's about the creek, it's going to send it to Public Works, and about a new street light, it'll send it to traffic engineering.
Okay, and so there'll be forms there at the website, City of Vista.
Yeah, you can actually do it on report problem too on the city. Report a problem on the City of Vista website, And you can see
Okay.
that there and click, it'll give you options to click, and then it'll send a email/work order to the appropriate department.
Okay, and that's the best way as opposed to going into City Hall.
Yeah, and if you have other questions, you feel free. You can I can get you my information. You can contact me.
That'd be great.
Okay, Toby, you could reach out to us at contact@civicmic.com and we can forward on your information to Chris.
All right, good. I'll do it. Thank you so much.
Great. Anyone else with questions? Feel free to raise your hand or remove yourself from mute.
Sorry to interrupt you, Danielle. We have just a direct message question here from LD Fonseca. What districts does this pertain to?
Mike, did you want to answer that?
Sure, yeah, so the existing districts are LLMD number 1 and Street Maintenance District. The new districts have a very similar moniker. But those are the two that are existing, as well as ones that would replace them.
Thank you, Mike. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. If you are on the phone, you can *6 to unmute yourself. If you don't have the option to click through the app to unmute, you can hit *6 if you have a question. Okay. Well, it looks like we have a good group of people that were here to listen in, but not a lot of questions. So if you do have questions later that come up, please feel free to reach out to us. You can send them to contact@civicmic.com, or you can send them directly to from the web page as well, or you can email info@cityofvista.com. So there's a couple different ways you can get the questions over. Anything that's sent to CivicMic, we will forward to the city staff, the appropriate city staff, to get answers and then post that on the web page as well. And we appreciate you all joining us. John, is there? No, there's no other questions there in the chat. So we appreciate everyone joining us tonight. And
Danielle,
yes.
real quickly, I just wanted to point out to Toby that the link for the report a problem portion of the city's website was posted in the chat. So that is there for you if you want to look for that. If you can see the chat there, that's the direct link for that report a problem.
Yeah, and the chat button's at the bottom of the screen. You click on that and it should come up on the right-hand side there for you. We will be hosting 2 in-person meetings on March 10th and March 18th. So information will come out via postcard and on the web page as well to let you know about the time and location of those in-person meetings. We plan to have that as a workshop format where you can come in and ask questions. So anything that comes up now, if you look at your proposed assessment amount and have a question about that, we will have our assessment engineers there to answer questions. We will have city staff there to answer questions about the services. So that would be your opportunity to do that if you have other questions once you find out more information from our webpage or once you receive your ballot there. So we look forward to hearing from all of you, and hopefully you can all attend that. Bring a friend, bring a neighbor, and we hope to see you there as well. So thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good night.